Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about must-draft sleepers for the 2023 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about prospects at the running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions. Players that at this current moment in time, in terms of average draft position, are being selected outside of the top 40. And in some circumstances, some of these players are being selected outside of the top 50 of their current position. So this gives us an opportunity to select fantasy prospects who are being undervalued and can absolutely pay dividends on the overall investment that we make in our upcoming 2023 fantasy football drafts. Now, before we get into talking about these players, as I'll present statistics and data that I've gathered this offseason in order to justify the reasons why we want to go ahead and make the investments for these fantasy prospects. A reminder, if you guys have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season with the singular goal of trying to help you win a fantasy football championship. So whether it is one of these sleepers videos, the tier list that I've produced already this offseason, league winners at the running back position, which will be out tomorrow, bold predictions, and of course, the weekly 7 days a week throughout the entirety of the regular season, whether it's waiver wire pickups, rankings at every single primary position, wide receiver, running back, quarterback, tight end, live streams on Sunday mornings, Thursdays, Mondays, all of that in order to help you capture a fantasy football championship. So subscribe today. Thank you very much. Additionally, a couple reminders. If you guys haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy at this current moment in time, you can go ahead and do so. Use code Andrew. Make that first-time deposit minimum of $10 because you'll not only get the first-time deposit match, you'll get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide with those rankings for this upcoming weekend's draft. And additionally, you'll get rankings every single Sunday morning from weeks 1 through 18, half PPR, full PPR, all of it, the full extent, every single Sunday morning in order to help you guys win a fantasy football championship. So be sure to check that out today. Link down in the description. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into talking about some must-draft sleepers for the 2023 fantasy football season, beginning with a wide receiver who is currently being drafted outside of the top 50 wide receivers on ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, and even on Underdog Fantasy is currently sitting at wide receiver 54 at an ADP of 118.6. Going into 2023, NICO Collins should be the number one wide receiver for the Houston Texans. And even though in seasons past, that has been a far more valuable overall prospect considering the likes of DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks have been associated with this organization, I truly do believe that the improvements that NICO Collins has made as a wide receiver is certainly going to elevate him with the new regime within the Houston Texans organization. Of course, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, and of course, the rookie CJ Stroud as their quarterback who has already been named the starter. Now, when we look at what exactly NICO Collins was able to accomplish with CJ Stroud this offseason during the preseason, specifically, NICO Collins played 36 of the total 43 offensive snaps with the starters and CJ Stroud. He ran 21 routes on those overall snaps and was targeted 28.57% of those routes that he ran. Pretty good overall numbers. 6 targets, 4 receptions, 32 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown throughout the 3 games in which they participated in the preseason on the couple of drives that the first team offense was moving. Now, when we go ahead and just kind of rewind back to 2022, in terms of what NICO Collins was able to accomplish, despite the fact that Davis Mills wasn't the most incredible quarterback last year, obviously has his highs and lows. Overall, NICO Collins was still relevant when healthy. Specifically, in games in which he was targeted 5 or more times, was averaging 9.3 half PPR fantasy points per game. Additionally, when you look at the last 2 seasons of his career, 2021 and 2022, any games in which he's played 70% or more of the offensive snaps, which of course, as a primary number one outside receiver, you will certainly be able to accomplish that. He's averaging 9.36 half PPR fantasy points per game. Last season amongst all wide receivers, had a 12.8 average depth of target. He ranked 27th amongst all wide receivers with a minimum of 40 targets. So as long as he's playing on the outside, he's able to stretch the field and of course see a high volume of targets, which we're anticipating going into this upcoming season, primarily because the Houston Texans offense is seeing a vacancy of 343 total targets. Majority of the overall receiving options within this offense from last year are gone. They've gone ahead and brought in Robert Woods, who's a 31-year-old wide receiver. They brought in Noah Brown, who his best season was in 2022, but it was 43 receptions and 555 receiving yards. Not great. You have Tank Dell, which is, of course, a rookie wide receiver, who's going to have himself a rookie season of learning and trying to develop within this offense. And, of course, additionally, they have John Mechie. Technically, he's a rookie because he sat out the entirety of last season. So, ultimately, we have 2 rookie wide receivers, Noah Brown, who's never really been a primary option of any offense, and then you have Robert Woods, who is definitely getting up there in age. This makes NICO Collins the number one receiving option of this offense. And when we're talking about the Houston Texans and the overall opportunity in which majority of the games that they participate in this season, even though they are going to have a culture change, they're bringing in a new, head coach who's defensive minded. They're going to try to transform the defense. even with all this taken into account, they're going to probably still be in many negative game scripts, as this is a team that is going to be playing from behind. And if they're going to be throwing for majority of games, we would love to see CJ Stroud, of course, send it in the direction of his number one receiving option, which is Nico Collins, who will absolutely be able to benefit from targets. And of course, his fantasy upside will continue to grow. A wide receiver who played on the outside and was number one amongst all receivers in 2022 in terms of a contested catch rate, caught 75% of the contested passes that were sent in his direction. I truly think Nico Collins, a sleeper option that you should be considering in your upcoming leagues. Now, before we go ahead and continue on, a reminder, a lot of the options that we'll mention over the course of today's episode are going to be players that, if you're playing in a league where you only have 15 roster spots, let's say, for example, you got 9 starters with 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex, a kicker, and a defense, and then 5 bench spots. Typically, these players are not going to be justifiable to roster because there's so much more depth. I'm talking about leagues which are 12, 14, 16 team leagues that have wider bench spots and, of course, far more starting positions, whether it is a super flex, double flex, etc., 3 starting wide receivers. All of these would then justify the investment in these players going forward. Just keep that in mind. Additionally, if you guys are trying to keep up with that kind of wide spectrum of depth and you want more intensive rankings regarding, my top 100 running backs, top 120 wide receivers, top 200 flex going into this upcoming season, be sure to go ahead, travel down to the description. Like I mentioned earlier, check out Underdog Fantasy. When you use code Andrew to sign up and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get that first-time deposit match up to $100, you're going to get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide and rankings. Like I mentioned, those rankings by position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense; by tier, including top 200 flex rankings, which includes running back, wide receiver, tight end, and quarterback, for both half PPR and full PPR. Those quarterback individual rankings are for a 4-point per passing touchdown league and 6-point per passing touchdown league. All of that encompassed within the 2023 Fantasy Football Draft Guide, which shares my methodology as to how I navigate my drafts and the statistics that justify the reasons as to why I draft the way I do going into 2023 and why I found success in doing so. Additionally, you'll go ahead and get rankings every single Sunday morning from weeks 1 through 18 within that individual week's rankings: half PPR, full PPR, by position, by tier. All you got to do, sign up today, use code Andrew, make that first-time deposit. For those of you wondering if you're eligible, be sure to use the map on the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location, and go ahead and start drafting today. Again, if you make a sign-up at this current moment in time, you'll also be able to take advantage of the Week 1 overall pick'em, where it's 0.5 passing yards from Patrick Mahomes. Absolutely be able to put that within a pick'em slip and take advantage of the opportunity. And of course, draft responsibly via Underdog Fantasy. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get into the second player that I wanted to talk about. Now, this one's very interesting. This is a thumbnail for today's episode. We're talking about ACHANE. A couple weeks ago, I talked about a list of players in which truly I believed that you should be avoiding at all costs. Now, going into this upcoming week, with all that has taken place, considering the entire scenario of Jonathan Taylor not being traded, this organization not bringing in a running back, and of course, Jeff Wilson Jr., one of the primary running backs within this rotation, going to the injured reserve with an abdomen and hand injury, there is an expectation where ACHANE can absolutely be that rookie running back similar to Kenneth Walker last year. Now, in terms of play style, they're absolutely different running backs, but when I compare Kenneth Walker last year to ACHANE this year, let's think about who ACHANE is playing behind this year. RAHEEM MOSTERT, a running back that is 31 years old and has had injury history. When we go back to Kenneth Walker's situation last season, he played behind Rashad Penny, another veteran running back that has had themselves a plethora of injuries throughout their career. So if we are sitting in a situation where there's no Jeff Wilson Jr., there is no impending potential of Jonathan Taylor being traded to the Miami Dolphins, and RAHEEM MOSTERT is the only thing stopping ACHANE to step up and have himself success. I know ACHANE is dealing with a shoulder AC joint sprain, but if you think about last season, Kenneth Walker, he started the year with a sports hernia. Even with the slow start in the beginning, this is an investment in the long term. We're talking about a running back that is currently being drafted as RB 53, 53, 44 in terms of an overall average ADP of like 127 plus on all 4 of the primary platforms, whether it is ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, or even Underdog Fantasy. Yes, this is a running back that is 5'9", 190 pounds. He's a smaller stature back, but what the Miami Dolphins want to go ahead and construct as an offense is a track team, and that's what they've done by bringing in ACHANE, a running back out of Texas A&M who ran a 4.32 40-yard dash. I mean, that kind of speed is unmatched in the National Football League, and that's the kind of track team they're trying to build. This is a running back that last season at Texas A&M accumulated 196 rushing attempts for 1,102 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, 48 targets, 36 receptions, 196 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. That receiving potential in comparison to someone like RAHEEM MOSTERT, who has never really been a fluid pass catching back. He's been able to accomplish some feats in that overall category, but he's never been a receiving back in his own right. There's a reason why this organization brought in someone like Chase Edmonds last offseason as a free agent signing, is because they want a change of pace back that can absolutely contribute in the receiving game, who also has speed and the ability to run between the tackles. That is exactly what De'Von Achane presents to this organization. And again, like I was mentioning, currently on ESPN, his current ADP is 168.7, RB53. On Yahoo, 127.8, RB53. These opportunities to select these running backs in a redraft, especially as a lottery ticket going into this year as a rookie running back, seems like a great opportunity. Now, if you want to go ahead and invest in Raheem Mostert, I could understand why. He is going a little bit ahead of De'Von Achane, so in terms of investment, you're going to have to select earlier, but understand the implied risk with Raheem Mostert. I mean, in terms of injuries since 2019, Raheem Mostert has only played 41 of his eligible 66 regular season games. In terms of injuries, we're talking about concussions, left calf strain, MCL sprain grade 2, high ankle sprain grade 3 twice in a row, patella strain, a meniscus trim, a knee strain, and of course a thumb fracture from last season. This guy has dealt with a lot of injuries in his career. And considering his current age and the fact that he is going into a year where they're anticipating him to get a pretty heavy volume of touches, if not for De'Von Achane immediately stepping up and taking away said touches, it's going to be difficult for Raheem Mostert to be able to continue the entire year at a top capacity. There's a reason why they brought in Jeff Wilson Jr. There's a reason why they brought in Chase Edmonds last year, because they know that Raheem Mostert cannot carry this ball and this entire team on his back. Now, with his overall opportunities, he was effective last year. So I could understand and I can justify the investment in his overall ADP currently because of the absence of Jeff Wilson, and there's no impending doom of a potential, Jonathan Taylor trade, considering Jonathan Taylor is currently on the PUP for the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, last season, Raheem Mostert had 11 of his 16 games consist of 50% or more of the offensive snaps. 12 of those 16 games during the regular season, 10 or more touches. Again, when we have seen Tua healthy last season, the Miami Dolphins offense gave the ball to their running backs, 18.7 rushing attempts per game and 4.2 targets per game. So pretty decent opportunity in terms of the overall contribution from those opportunities. We're able to score 0.7 touchdowns per game, 90.5 rushing yards per game, and 24 receiving yards per game with 2.7 catches. About 17 fantasy points per game from the overall backfield in the games in which Tua was healthy. So if we're going into this upcoming season and they're trying to keep the ball out of Tua's hands, they're running more RPO, they want to get a receiving back into the mix. They want someone that can run through the tackles and be that burst of speed that this offense needs outside of Tyreek Hill and, of course, Jalen Waddle. I truly think you can invest in Raheem Mostert and find some value, especially early in the season. But in the entire long spectrum of this season, if you're looking at it as a marathon, I want De'Von Achane on my team. I want a player that could absolutely out-sustain him, and considering the lack of wear and tear on his body, can immediately become the number one, and someone that Mike McDaniel stood on the table, banging the table, saying, I want to draft De'Von Achane. We're going to move up. We're going to trade up for him, and we're going to bring him into this organization so he can make an immediate impact. So that's typically where we're going in terms of a sleeper must-draft option at the running back position. Before we go ahead and move on to the next prospect, I want to go ahead and remind you guys, if you have not yet already, be sure to travel down to the description of the video. Check out AndrewKiorkofShop.com. Currently, I'm wearing the nice black crew neck in regards to the Greetings and Salutations 1.01 brand. Again, the official merchandise line of the Andrew Kiorkof YouTube channel. You can travel there today. Of course, support the channel. Rep the merch, rep Greetings and Salutations. Again, whether it's the tie-dye hoodies, our ball caps, beanies, bucket hats, all of that available. Check out the website today and support the channel. Greatly appreciated. Again, those tie-dye hoodies, those champion branded tie-dye hoodies are in limited capacity, so be sure to go ahead and get those today. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into talking about another must-draft option. This is Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison currently, in terms of all platforms, is sitting around wide receiver 37 through wide receiver 41. So he's pretty much going outside the top 36, which gives us an opportunity at a current ADP of 108 on Yahoo, 109 on ESPN, sitting at around 86 on Sleeper, to have an opportunity of selecting a receiver that could absolutely be the number 2 within this offense and make an immediate impact. He was in 23rd overall selection of the 2023 NFL draft. Again, when we talk about first-round wide receivers since 2018, of all the first-round wide receivers that have been able to play 16 games in their rookie year, basically stay healthy, their overall average production in that rookie year, 116 targets, 74 receptions, 1,016 receiving yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns. That would absolutely make someone like Jordan Addison out of USC an immediate top 36 wide receiver option, if not better for sure. Now, when we look at the amount of times that has taken place in terms of wide receivers being able to stay fully healthy throughout their rookie year, there have only been 10 instances of that case, and 8 of those 10 overall wide receivers were ranked within the top 36 of their position in a half PPR scoring format. So we can absolutely find promise promise within Jordan Addison. He just has to stay healthy going into this upcoming season. I mean, he's following a lineage in terms of USC wide receivers that over the course of the last couple seasons have found a lot of success in the National Football League, and a lot of them in their rookie seasons. I mean, last year, Drake London, early first round selection, came into the league, was averaging 8.39 fantasy points per game, finished as the wide receiver 35 overall for the Atlanta Falcons. They're number one. Obviously, pulling number one coverage is a lot more difficult. We won't have to see that from Jordan Addison, as he'll be playing alongside guys like TJ Hawkinson, one of the highest paid tight ends in NFL history, and of course, Justin Jefferson, who will eventually, hopefully before this offseason kind of concludes, he'll probably end up being the highest paid wide receiver in NFL history. So, of course, the overall pressure for Addison to make plays is going to be far more alleviated than what someone like Drake London had to deal with last season. Now, we talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown. Even though he wasn't a first-round selection, he found immediate success. Drafted by the Detroit Lions in his rookie year, was averaging 10.72 fantasy points per game throughout the entire season and finished as wide receiver 21. But we all know what he was capable of accomplishing late in that season, where he was averaging over 20 fantasy points per game from weeks 13 through 18 of the 2021 rookie season of Amon-Ra St. Brown. We look at other wide receivers like a Michael Pittman Jr. Even though his rookie season when he joined the Indianapolis Colts, T.Y. Hilton was still there, and it did not allow Michael Pittman Jr. to kind of flourish as an immediate threat. But we've also seen guys like Juju Smith-Schuster many years ago immediately join an offense, be alongside someone like Antonio Brown. Again, similar to what we're seeing this upcoming season with Jordan Addison playing alongside someone like Justin Jefferson, high caliber wide receiver option. Juju Smith-Schuster, wide receiver number 16 overall his rookie year, putting up over 12 fantasy points per game. So there is a history of success from USC wide receivers. I'm not saying it's an automatic for Jordan Addison to be able to stay healthy and reach this kind of potential that the other wide receivers from USC have been able to demonstrate, but I truly think that this school pretty much is a farm for elite wide receivers that have kind of joined the NFL as of late, and it'll continue to be the case, hopefully, with Jordan Addison. Now, when we look at the Minnesota Vikings, again, amongst all teams in the National Football League last season, they had the third highest passing rate amongst all teams. Kevin O'Connell came in and in his first year established that they wanted to pass the ball a lot. Specifically, from weeks 9 through 17 of the 2022 season, as soon as they traded for TJ Hawkinson, there was a shift in terms of the overall utilization and opportunities given to wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends in the receiving game. Specifically, the wide receiver position commanded 62.39% of the overall targets, while the running back position only dealt with 10.83% of the overall targets, and the tight end position 25.93. Amongst all teams in the National Football League last season, the Minnesota Vikings were number 2 amongst all in terms of wide receiver targets overall. When we look at the overall history of Kevin O'Connell, of course, he was the former Rams offensive coordinator in 2021. The Rams in 2021 were number 2 amongst all teams that given season in terms of wide receiver targets. So if, in fact, we're going to continue to see this high utilization of the wide receiver position, despite the fact that we have, of course, TJ Hawkinson in the lineup, he's going to get his targets. It's not really going to impede upon Jordan Addison. It's just a matter of the running back position getting less targets going into this upcoming year. And the fact that he is probably going to fill into the Adam Thielen role. You got to remember, Adam Thielen over the course of last season averaged 6.5 targets per game, was the wide receiver 30 overall. I think Adam Thielen, of course, dealt with himself some injuries last year, but is also an older wide receiver. Last season was 32 years old. You bring in a young rookie that is going to make an immediate impact, especially down in the red zone. Of course, with everyone trying to stop Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and Alexander Mattison, the most open target or potential option could end up being Jordan Addison, could end up having a Calvin Ridley-esque rookie year, finding the end zone a lot. Now, even though KJ Osborne has been an active member of this offense for the last 2 years, last season finished as wide receiver 45 and was targeted 5.29 times per game. If, in fact, some of those overall opportunities go in the direction of Jordan Addison on top of what Adam Thielen is vacated with, there is high upside for Jordan Addison going into year 1. All right, let's move on to another player. We're talking about a tight end by the name of Sam LAPORTA. Now, we were just mentioning TJ Hawkinson at a pretty high rate there in regards to what exactly Jordan Addison will be able to accomplish, because, of course, TJ Hawkinson is going to be a huge part of that offense, being targeted 8 or more times in 8 of his last 11 games with the Minnesota Vikings last season. But Sam LAPORTA was drafted specifically in 2023 to fill in the gap that TJ Hawkinson has left within this organization. At this current moment of time, Sam LAPORTA on ESPN drafted as tight end 18, Sleeper tight end 16, Yahoo tight end 27, and Underdog tight end 13. He is currently at an ADP of about 130 to 165 across this entire spread of range. There is an opportunity to be able to wait on tight end and get a second tight end potentially on roster who can make an immediate impact, and that is, again, filling in for TJ Hawkinson. Now, the reason why we know for a fact that this organization wants to utilize the tight end position is because their current head coach, Dan Campbell, used to be not only a tight ends coach with the New Orleans Saints in seasons past, but he's also been a tight end in the National Football League. This is a former player turned coach who was a tight end in the league and, of course, wants to continue to utilize, as an offensive-minded head coach, the tight end position at a relatively high capacity. So even despite the fact that Sam LAPORTA is a rookie and there hasn't been much success from rookie tight ends over the course of the past decade in terms of fantasy production, I mean, the last couple rookies that I can think of besides Kyle Pitts, Pat Freiermuth, and Evan Ingram find immediate rookie success, really there isn't much. Therefore, I can understand his current ADP and the fact that he is a sleeper, but think about the overall opportunity and the variables that are going to surround him going into this offense. This offense has had a huge vacancy of targets. With no more Jamal Williams, no more DJ Chark, and no more TJ Hawkinson, we have opportunity. And outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown commanding targets, and of course Jahmyr Gibbs getting himself a sprinkle of receptions, I believe the next man up in terms of commanding targets would be Sam LAPORTA. Last season, the Detroit Lions targeted their tight ends the 26th most times amongst all teams, only 93 total targets. Led to 66 receptions, 748 receiving yards, but 12 receiving touchdowns from the tight end position. We've talked about this already this offseason. Jared Goff, amongst all quarterbacks inside the 10-yard line last season, had the second most passing touchdowns, only behind Patrick Mahomes. He had 20 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions inside the 10-yard line. Of course, a lot of those going in the direction of these tight ends that were formerly on the Detroit Lions roster. But now that Sam LAPORTA is going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities, of course, we're getting into a situation in 2023 where he can not only just be the next TJ Hawkinson, but have himself a lot of red zone upside within this offense. Again, TJ Hawkinson, prior to being traded last season, was getting about 7.14 targets per game, 4.71 receptions per game, 71 receiving yards per game, and 0.43 receiving touchdowns per game, for an average of 12.31 fantasy points per game. Again, TJ Hawkinson was a top 5 tight end throughout that span of time in 2022. And even if you go back to 2021, when Dan Campbell was the primary, play caller of this offense, of course, and the head coach, TJ Hawkinson from weeks 1 through 13 in 2021 was averaging 9.57 fantasy points per game throughout the first 12 games of the season and was the number 3 overall tight end throughout that spectrum of time. Sam LAPORTA is coming out of Iowa, had himself 94 targets, 58 receptions, 657 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown in his final year at college. I truly do believe there is an impact to be made by Sam LAPORTA in an offense that, of course, is going to need red zone upside. And like I've said in the past, in terms of being an elite tight end, being a top 12 ranked player from weeks 1 through 18 in any individual week, about 8 of those 12 overall top 12 tight end ones within that given overall week typically score at least 1 touchdown. So if you want to be in that conversation, you want to be a consistent threat, you have to have the upside of touchdowns. And I absolutely believe that is on the table this upcoming season from Sam LAPORTA, the starting tight end for the Detroit Lions. Moving on, let's talk about Zay Flowers, another rookie going into this upcoming season. This is 3 rookies that, again, in my mind, currently, based on their ADPs, are being slept on. Zay Flowers is currently sitting around wide receiver 39 to 44. And even though he is being selected just behind someone like Jordan Addison, I truly do believe, based on the fact that he is joining an offense that is going to be transforming. They're going from having Greg Roman as their former offensive coordinator, a team that last season in 2022 were number 32 amongst all teams in terms of wide receiver targets, 31 in wide receiver receptions, 32 in wide receiver receiving yards, and 29 in terms of wide receiver receiving touchdowns amongst all teams in the National Football League. And that has been a consistent pace over the course of the last 3 seasons within this Baltimore Ravens offense under Greg Roman. Now we approach the new era of the Baltimore Ravens with Todd Monken as their offensive coordinator. You go back to 2018 when he was the offensive coordinator of the Buccaneers. Again, amongst all teams in the National Football League that season, they were number 2 in wide receiver targets, number 4 in wide receiver receptions, number 1 in wide receiver receiving yards, and number 4 in wide receiver receiving touchdowns. Overall, we're going to see a shift within this offense. Lamar Jackson is going to be asked to pass the ball a bunch. And when we're talking about a first-round wide receiver, a player that was picked 22nd overall, in fact, 1 spot ahead of Jordan Addison, like I mentioned with Jordan Addison, since 2018, amongst all wide receivers who have been able to play 16 games minimum in their rookie season, there have been 10 wide receivers throughout that capacity. 8 of them were able to finish within the top 36 rankings within their given season. And on average, those 8 wide receivers totaled 74 receptions, 1,000 plus receiving yards, and about 6 receiving touchdowns. If in fact that realm of possibility is on the table for Zay Flowers, why not invest in him? When he's competing with guys like Rashad Bateman, which of course dealt with a lot of injuries last year and really hasn't even made an impact within this organization thus far, despite being a first-round pick last season. If in fact Zay Flowers can find himself favor within this offense, obviously playing alongside someone like Odell Beckham Jr., who they paid a lot of money to come in and make an immediate impact, he can learn from OBJ. a guy that is coming off of 2 ACL reconstruction surgeries that is obviously going to make an impact on his overall play. At the wide receiver position, it's far different in terms of recovering from an ACL in comparison to the running back position. We have seen that year over year, as wide receivers can immediately make an impact in comparison to running backs, who of course still need time to find their footing, and typically in that second year from that ACL can find their actual fantasy upside. But at this current moment in time, a wide receiver that is being selected 39 to 44 seems like a perfect investment for an offense that should be taking a step forward. Now, Zay Flowers is not going to be the number one. Mark Andrews, by far and away, will be the number one receiving option. But if he could be the number 2 in this offense, the touchdown upside, the effectiveness of this entire scheme, I truly do believe Zay Flowers can make an immediate impact and be a great sleeper option for 2023. Moving on, let's talk about Antonio Gibson, a player that many people have slept on this offseason and is currently being selected at around RB 34, 36. It ranges depending on obviously the scoring format of your league. But ultimately, you got to remember, Antonio Gibson has finished as RB 12, 10, and 31 in his career. And even though this most recent season was RB 31 because of the fact that he was dealing with injuries, and of course Brian Robinson was a huge part of the offense, I think going into this upcoming year, we still have to remember this is a running back that, when given opportunity, has found a lot of success in fantasy football. Specifically, since 2020, his rookie year, any games in which he's played 50% or more of the offensive snaps, he's averaging 14.22 fantasy points per game. And even though last season, in the games in which he played with Brian Robinson from weeks 5 through 17, after Brian Robinson came back from his injured reserve stint, we saw Antonio Gibson averaging 8.7 attempts per game, 34 rushing yards per game, 0.09 rushing touchdowns per game, 3.8 targets, 3.0 receptions, 23 receiving yards, 0.18 receiving touchdowns, and 8.82 fantasy points per game from weeks 5 through 17 with Brian Robinson in the lineup. I truly do think that Antonio Gibson has far more potential ceiling than what we were able to witness from this organization last season. I mean, we're talking about a running back that had the 12th most targets amongst all running backs last year, 58 targets that led to 46 receptions, 353 receiving yards, and was number 29 amongst all running backs in terms of routes run. So if in fact he runs even more routes this upcoming season and they give him more opportunity, I mean, why not make the investment? This is a running back that used to be a college wide receiver. In fact, Antonio Gibson, coming out of college and being drafted by the Washington Commanders, at the time, he had more receptions in college than rushing attempts. You got to put that into perspective. This is a receiver in his own right that, yes, has been kind of transitioned to the running back position, similar to what we have seen from Cordero Patterson over the last couple of years. But going into 2023 with a new offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy, coming in, he was the former offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs from 2018 through 2022. He was a former running backs coach for the Kansas City Chiefs from 2013 through 2017, and was a former NFL running back himself. Used to play for the Eagles back in the day. Eric Bieniemy, going into this upcoming season, should be able to turn this backfield into looking like exactly what the Kansas City Chiefs were able to accomplish last season, which, yes, is giving a majority of the rushing attempts to a primary runner, like Isaiah Pacheco last season. It's going to go majority of the attempts towards Brian Robinson. But the amount of targets that they attributed to the running back position, specifically last season, the Kansas City Chiefs targeted their running backs the 13th most times, 109 targets that led to 86 receptions, 815 overall receiving yards, and 12 receiving touchdowns. That kind of opportunity, if it was to go in the direction of Antonio Gibson, and they turn him into the Jerick McKinnon per se of this offense. You got to remember, Jerick McKinnon last season, from weeks 10 through 18, was averaging 13.88 half PPR fantasy points per game in the final 9 regular season games of the Kansas City Chiefs season, and throughout that span of time, had 37 receptions and 40 rushing attempts. He is going to get himself an even split of opportunity, and if in fact we get even more rushing attempts from Antonio Gibson because we know he's capable of handling the ball and they want to spread it out, I think his potential ceiling of production based on where he's being selected, again, is far higher. He not only demonstrated that last year, but can once again do it this year. Despite the fact that he's being selected late, you got to remember that since 2019, amongst all running backs who have ever had 150 rushing attempts and 40 receptions in a given season, we've seen 47 of those running backs since 2019. 45 of those 47 running backs produced a base minimum of 159.8 half PPR fantasy points. Over the course of the last 4 seasons, 159.8 fantasy points is RB 24, 24, 21, and 23. I truly do think that if Antonio Gibson is utilized as a primary receiving threat within this offense, he can absolutely make an impact and absolutely crush his current ADP as a sleeper option that honestly is not going to be a starter for your team, but is going to be a bench depth play that often is being slept on this offseason. Now, before we close out today's video, I want to go ahead and mention a couple more names in terms of honorable mentions. We're talking about Marvin Mims. He could be a potential great option depending on how long Judy is out for. Jalen Warren is another name that has been thrown around a lot this offseason. Could be the Austin Eckler to Najee Harris being Melvin Gordon. Again, very similar to what we saw from the Los Angeles Chargers back in the day, 2017, 2018. We saw a split backfield, but both being able to find a lot of success in that backfield could be a part of the formula this upcoming season for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But another player that I wanted to mention that currently has the ability to potentially be the #1 receiving target of their offense. Again, Nico Collins has the potential of being the #1 receiving option of his offense. So does Zay Flowers. I mean, Sam LaPorta is going to be, in terms of the offense, probably the #3 receiving option, but a relevant tight end nonetheless. Devon Achane could be the RB1 of his team, which would be great. And honestly, so can Antonio Gibson. It's in the realm of possibility. But another receiving option I wanted to mention that can be the #1 of his team is Adam Thielen. I know I mentioned him already thus far this episode, and I already mentioned the fact that he is going into his 2023 season of being 33 years old. But Adam Thielen has said on multiple interviews this offseason thus far, specifically on the Pat McAfee show, that he is feeling healthier than he ever has in his career. And now that he's gone ahead and moved away from the Minnesota Vikings, he can get back to being the primary receiver of an offense. Like last season, he even mentioned it, like he has to play second fiddle to Justin Jefferson because Justin Jefferson is objectively a better player than him at this current moment in time. But now that you join an offense that Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, Jonathan Mingo, the rookie wide receiver out of Ole Miss, and Hayden Hurst are the best receiving threats within this overall offense with the first overall pick, Bryce Young, I truly do believe that Adam Thielen is going to be the leader of the pack. He's not only the foremost veteran, but he's also the best receiving option currently at current form, with Jonathan Mingo obviously having to learn and get himself some development over the course of the year. Hopefully he can learn from Adam Thielen. I think Thielen can make an immediate impact. He's a wide receiver being selected outside of the top 50 in terms of average ADP on a variety of platforms. And going into this upcoming year, again, could immediately find success. Again, in the last couple seasons, 2022 last season, finished as wide receiver 30, averaging 6.5 targets per game. In 2021, was wide receiver 28 with 7.3 targets per game. In 2020, was wide receiver 8 overall with 7.2 targets per game. He's been given ample opportunity, but where Adam Thielen has really found his value is the fact that he has scored 30 touchdowns in the last 3 years, 25 of them in the red zone. If he can make an impact and be the favorite target of Bryce Young, this offense is going to score points. It's a given. Frank Wright knows how to create an offense and a scheme that is built to succeed. He has proven that over the last couple seasons. So as long as all the pieces fall into place and Adam Thielen can stay healthy, amongst, of course, DJ Chark, who's already dealing with an injury, Jonathan Mingo, who, of course, is going to have to gain experience as we get closer to the season, Adam Thielen can make an immediate impact as someone who isn't going to really cost much in terms of overall investment. All right, that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Those were the must-draft sleepers going into the 2023 fantasy football season. Tomorrow, we will be talking about league-winning running backs that you should be drafting going into this upcoming weekend. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, don't forget to check out Underdog Fantasy. Use code Andrew, make that first-time deposit to get not only the draft guide, the rankings this offseason, and of course the rankings every single week, weeks 1 through 18 of the regular season, from my email to yours on Sunday mornings, in order to make sure that your lineups are set and helping you capture a 2023 fantasy football championship. Be sure to subscribe, click the like button down below, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.